Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora. File 28. Lisa. Have you ever watched someone steal from you in front of 41 witnesses and done absolutely nothing to stop it? I have. I sat 3 chairs to his left while my boss walked through slides I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. A $12 million pitch. My research, my data, my sleepless nights. All coming out of his mouth like he had built it from scratch. He even called it his passion project. And our CEO was sitting in the front row, watching every word, because she had set the whole thing up as a trap. But I sat there quietly and smiled, because behind the scenes, I had already set everything in motion. My name is Lisa Fairbanks. I was the one who did the work. He was the one who took the credit, and his mistake was assuming I would just let it happen. See, here is the thing about stolen credit in corporate America. The people who steal it always see themselves as the smartest person in the room. They convince themselves that nobody will notice, that nobody keeps records, that nobody is paying close enough attention to tell the difference between the person who did the work and the person who presented it. The truth is, they have simply been allowed to get away with it for too long, until they come across someone who will not let them. What my boss, whose boundary-crossing behavior had been tolerated for far too long, did not know was that I had spent weeks building an evidence chain so solid that when the moment came, there would be no room for excuses, no room for lies, and no room for the kind of corporate hypocrisy that lets people like him survive. This is the story of how ambition without integrity destroyed a career in exactly 22 minutes. Here is what happened. I joined Whitmore Financial Partners straight out of my MBA program at NYU. 6 years later, I had worked my way up to Client Relations Director, managing our firm's most valuable accounts from our offices on the 37th floor in Lower Manhattan. My days were filled with client calls, strategy sessions, and the constant pressure of maintaining relationships worth hundreds of millions in managed assets. Still, I loved every minute of it. You can probably tell how important my work was in my life. Another reason I loved my work was our CEO, Margaret Ellison. I had a great deal of respect for her, and there were good reasons for that. She had built Whitmore from a boutique advisory firm into one of Manhattan's most respected financial consultancies. She was sharp, demanding, and fair. In 6 years, I had seen her fire people for incompetence and promote others for brilliance. What I had never seen her do was tolerate dishonesty. Margaret had a saying she repeated at every quarterly meeting: "Your reputation is the only asset that appreciates without investment. Damage it once, and no amount of capital can buy it back." I sincerely agreed with Margaret's principle. I had even built my career on it. Then Dominic Hale arrived. Dominic was hired as our new senior vice president of client strategy, brought in from a competing firm to strengthen our leadership pipeline. In plain English, that meant he was being positioned as Margaret's eventual successor. He was 42, Harvard MBA, 15 years across 3 top-tier firms, and the kind of resume that made you wonder why he kept moving. But nobody asked that question. Not at first. He was my new boss. I had reported directly to Margaret for 4 years. Now there was a layer between us, I will be honest. I liked him at first. Everyone did. In our first one-on-one, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Lisa, I have heard incredible things about you. I did not come here to change what works. I came here to support the people already doing exceptional work, and from everything I have seen, that starts with you." My ego was stroked. I walked out feeling valued. Looking back, that was exactly the point. Dominic did not build relationships. He built dependencies. He made you trust him so completely that when he eventually took from you, you would hesitate to fight back. Then, 6 weeks after his arrival, the first sign came. I had been working on a competitive analysis for a mid-tier client. Solid, thorough work. I sent the completed analysis to Dominic for review, as was now standard. Everything went through him before reaching Margaret or the client. 2 days later, I was copied on an email from Dominic to Margaret. Attached was a polished PDF titled Strategic Benefits Restructuring, a Framework for Competitive Advantage. It was my analysis, every data point, every recommendation, but the cover page read, "Prepared by Dominic Hale, SVP Client Strategy. My name appeared nowhere. I tried to make sense of it. I stared at my screen for a long time. Margaret always paid close attention to attribution and never overlooked it. Then I told myself that this might have been standard practice at the firms where Dominic had worked before. He was my supervisor. He was presenting the team's work. Maybe in his view, that was how hierarchy functioned. Even though I was far from comfortable, I let it go and focused on my work. The second time was harder to ignore. A month later, Dominic presented a portfolio risk assessment to the senior partners. I had built the entire model over 2 weeks. Custom formulas, original analysis, hours of backtesting. Dominic walked through every slide with confidence because I had briefed him thoroughly the day before. When a partner asked how long the work had taken, Dominic smiled and said, "About 2 weeks of deep work. You know how these models are. 2 weeks of deep work. My 2 weeks. My deep work." He never once said my name. That night, I sat in my apartment and thought for a long time. The thoughts would not stop. Was I overreacting? Supervisors present their team's work all the time. After hours of sleepless thinking, I reached this conclusion: he was not presenting the team's work. He was erasing their contributions entirely. There is a difference between leadership and theft. I was not overreacting. The third time removed all doubt and pushed me to take action. A quarterly client review I had managed from start to finish. I prepared the slides, compiled the data, rehearsed my talking points. But when I arrived at the conference room, Dominic was already at the podium, my presentation on the screen. He smiled. "Lisa, glad you could make it. I will handle this one. Sensitive client, better if the SVP takes point." I sat down. I watched him present my work for the third time. And I decided, right there, that this was the last time it would ever happen. But I was not going to be stupid about it. Reporting your boss for stealing your work almost never goes the way you want. The company has invested in that person. They have the title, the salary, the relationships, and you are the one making the accusation. You sound bitter, jealous, threatened. I had seen it happen to others. The whistleblower becomes the problem. The thief keeps climbing. I needed evidence so overwhelming that no reasonable person could dismiss it, and I needed the right moment. So I did what I always did. I stayed calm. I documented everything with a cool head, and I started to build my case. Documentation was everything. In the professional world, your word means nothing without evidence. Your achievements mean nothing without attribution, and your intellectual contributions mean nothing without time-stamped files to prove authorship. I created a system. Every document I produced, I saved in 3 places: the shared drive, my personal backup, and a private cloud account so there would be no trace on the company network. Every email, I BCC'd myself. Every version of every file, I logged with dates and descriptions. Every briefing I gave Dominic, I followed up with a summary email, creating a paper trail that proved I was the source. It took discipline. 2 months of watching Dominic take credit while I smiled and said nothing, but the evidence was building. And it was devastating. Then came Meridian Tech. That spring, Whitmore was pursuing its biggest client acquisition in company history. Meridian Tech, a rapidly growing software company based in Austin, was looking to restructure their executive compensation packages and needed a firm to manage the transition. The account was worth $12 million in annual fees. Every senior partner wanted it. Margaret assigned the analysis to my team, which meant, in practice, she assigned it to me. I spent 3 weeks on that presentation. 3 weeks of late nights in front of my Bloomberg terminal, early mornings, and working through weekends. I analyzed Meridian's compensation structure, benchmarked against 17 competitors, and developed a phased transition plan that would save them 30% on tax liability while improving executive retention. The presentation was 64 slides of original analysis and strategic recommendations. It was, without exaggeration, the best work I had ever produced. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Dominic Hale was going to try to present it as his own. This time, I was ready. I sent Dominic the completed presentation on a Monday, 9 days before the scheduled client meeting. In the email, I wrote, Hi Dominic, attached is the final meridian analysis. I would love to walk you through the key points before the presentation. Let me know when you are available for a briefing. He replied within an hour. Great work. Let us meet tomorrow morning. I will take it from here for the client meeting. This is a C-level pitch, so I will present directly to their CEO. I want you in the room for support, but I will take the lead. There it was. 3 weeks of my work, and he was going to present it as his strategic vision to the most important client in company history. I took a deep breath. Then I smiled. Because this time, I had prepared for exactly this. Over the previous 3 weeks, I had embedded something into the presentation that Dominic would never notice. I had built in layers of technical depth that only someone who truly understood the methodology could explain. Specific calibration choices in the benchmarking model, unusual weighting decisions in the tax optimization framework, a proprietary adjustment on slide 27 that accounted for 3 variables that standard compensation benchmarks typically miss. If anyone asked about these details, there was only one person in the world who could answer, and it was not Dominic Hale. That was my plan, but what if everything did not go the way I expected? What if something went wrong and the whole thing backfired? That same Tuesday afternoon, with these concerns weighing on me, I stopped by Patricia's desk. Patricia Torres was Margaret's executive assistant, a woman who had been with the company almost as long as Margaret herself. She was quiet, observant, and missed nothing. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to be honest with me. I am concerned that some things have been going wrong. I need to find out if Dominic has ever presented work to Margaret as his own without mentioning the original author. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. I understand what you mean, but this has to stay between us for now. I have been keeping track, she said quietly. She opened the folder and showed me a detailed log. Dates, documents, meetings. Every instance where Dominic had submitted work to Margaret without crediting the person who actually produced it. It was not just me. He had done it to 3 other people on the team, but my work accounted for most of the entries. I stared at the folder. How long have you been doing this? Since his 2nd month, Patricia said, the writing quality of the reports he submitted did not match his emails or his meeting notes. Also, the writing styles of the reports were completely different from each other. Anyone paying attention could see that. Does Margaret know? Patricia's expression was careful. Margaret is aware I have concerns, but she wants evidence, not opinions. I nodded. She is about to get all the proof she needs. Learning that Patricia and Margaret were both aware of the situation boosted my morale and my courage. I was no longer alone. That evening, I compiled everything into a single folder. My documentation, Patricia's log, the email trails, the metadata, the timestamps. I sent it to Margaret with a brief note. There is something you need to see before the Meridian presentation. Margaret responded at 11:47 that night. My office, tomorrow, 7 a.m. When I arrived at Margaret's office the next morning, she was already reading through the folder. She did not look up. After 15 minutes, she closed it and looked at me. How long? Since his 2nd month. At first, I thought it was normal, but he is not presenting the team's work. He is erasing the team entirely and claiming sole authorship, and it seems like he has turned it into a systematic practice. Margaret was quiet. Then she said, something I did not expect. I hired Dominic because his previous firm gave him an exceptional recommendation. 3 months ago, I received a call from a former colleague there. She told me he had done the same thing at that firm. 2 analysts had resigned because of it, but when they complained, they were dismissed as disgruntled employees. She paused. I did not act on that because it was secondhand. I needed to see it myself, and now I have. She tapped the folder. You said, there is a Meridian presentation next week. Dominic plans to present your work? Yes. He told me yesterday he wants to present it to their CEO as his analysis. Margaret's expression hardened. Then we are going to let him? I blinked. Excuse me. If I confront Dominic now, she said, he will deny everything. He will say it was a misunderstanding. He will claim you are exaggerating. He will position himself as the victim and you as the disgruntled subordinate. I have seen it happen before. Besides, even if he leaves here and moves to another company, he will continue to apply his system and keep exploiting other people's work. She leaned forward. But if he stands up in front of 41 people and presents your work as his own, and then he cannot answer basic questions about the methodology, there is no room for denial, no room for spin, no room for excuses. I understood immediately. You want him to fail publicly. I want the truth to be undeniable, Margaret said. I want everyone in that room to see exactly who did the work and who stole it. No backroom conversations. No private settlements. No quiet resignation with a neutral reference that lets him do this to someone else at the next firm. My goal is to end this cycle of fraud completely. Can you handle that? Can you sit in that room and watch him present your work without saying a word? Knowing that I will give you the floor when the time comes, I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Yes, I can handle that. Good. Margaret stood, signaling that the meeting was over. And Lisa, do not change a single slide. I want him to present exactly what you created. Every chart, every model, every proprietary adjustment. When the questions come, and they will come, I want there to be no doubt about who the real author is. That morning, I walked out of Margaret's office feeling something I had not felt in months. Not anger. Not frustration. Certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing that the truth is on your side and that the people who matter are ready to hear it. Good and honorable people still existed, and they were on my side. The remaining days passed slowly. I briefed Dominic on the presentation as I normally would. I watched him rehearse my slides with the casual confidence of someone who no longer felt the weight of what he was doing. At one point during our prep session, he actually said, "This is really strong work. I think this could be the presentation that defines my tenure here." His tenure, my work, and he said it right to my face without a trace of irony. I said nothing. I smiled and nodded, and I waited. The presentation was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 in the morning. By 9:30, the main conference room on the 37th floor was filling with people, senior partners, analysts, support staff. And in the front row, 3 executives from Meridian Tech, including their CEO, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Reyes who had built her company from nothing and had no patience for incompetence. I took my seat 3 chairs to Dominic's left, close enough to be visible, far enough to be separate. Margaret sat in the front row, her expression neutral, a folder resting on her lap. Dominic stood at the podium, adjusting his cufflinks and scanning the room with a satisfied smile. He looked like a man who had already won. He looked like a man who believed he deserved to be standing exactly where he was. Could he have been this confident if he knew what was coming? At exactly 10 o'clock, Margaret gave a brief introduction. She thanked the Meridian team for their time, emphasized the importance of the relationship, and then turned toward the podium. "Dominic," she said simply, "whenever you are ready." He smiled. "Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to the Meridian team for being here. What I am about to present represents extensive analysis and strategic thinking that I believe positions Whitmore as the ideal partner for this transition. This has been a passion project of mine, and I am excited to walk you through the results." I noticed the pronouns. I am about to present, I believe, my strategic thinking, my passion project. There was no more we. No more team. Everything was I, me, mine, and the whole room heard it. For the first 14 minutes, Dominic was flawless. He moved through the slides with practiced ease, explaining the competitive analysis, walking through the compensation benchmarks, outlining the phased transition approach. His voice was steady. His eye contact was confident, and his command of the material was impressive. I will admit, he had an effective presentation ability. But the powerful ideas behind that presentation were mine. He had memorized my work word for word and wrapped it in a confident delivery. What Dominic did not realize, what he could not have anticipated, was that Victoria Reyes was taking detailed notes. And every few minutes, she would glance toward Margaret with an expression I could not quite read. The first crack appeared at minute 15. Dominic had just finished explaining the tax optimization strategy when Victoria raised her hand. "Excellent analysis," she said. "Can you walk me through the specific methodology you used for the benchmark calculations on slide 27? I noticed some unusual variable weighting that I would like to understand better." Dominic paused for a second. Just a second. just long enough for me to see the flash of panic behind his eyes before he recovered. It was clear that he never expected this and even hoped it would never happen. Of course, he said smoothly. The methodology was based on industry-standard approaches combined with some proprietary adjustments that I developed to account for the unique characteristics of the tech sector. Victoria tilted her head. What proprietary adjustments specifically? The weighting on the equity compensation variable seems unusually high. What was the rationale? The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Dominic glanced toward the slide, then back at Victoria, then down at his notes. He looked lost among his notes. He had memorized the what but not the why. He knew the conclusions but not the reasoning behind them. Because answering those questions required real expertise. Because he was not the expert. Because he had stolen the work from the expert. But he had only stolen the results. Well, he began, the adjustments were designed to account for certain variables in the executive compensation landscape that standard models do not typically address. The weighting reflects, a comprehensive assessment of current market conditions. Victoria's expression did not change. That is very general. Can you tell me specifically which variables drove the weighting decision? I am asking because we have our own internal models, and I want to understand where your approach differs. Dominic opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on him, waiting for an answer that was not coming. This was the moment. This was where the trap closed. Margaret rose from her seat in the front row. The movement was slow, deliberate, commanding. Every head in the room turned toward her. Perhaps, she said, her voice carrying across the silent boardroom, we should ask the person who actually developed that methodology to explain it. She turned to face me. Her eyes found mine with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Lisa, she said, would you care to answer Victoria's question? Every pair of eyes in the room swiveled toward me. Dominic's face went the color of ash. For a moment, his mouth moved, but no sound came out. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and walked to the front of the room. I was in no hurry. Each step was measured and intentional. I could feel the entire room watching me. When I reached the podium, I did not look at Dominic. I looked directly at Victoria Reyes. The proprietary adjustments on slide 27, I said, account for 3 specific variables that standard compensation benchmarks typically miss. First, the tech industry's accelerated vesting schedules, which create retention challenges that traditional models undervalue. Second, the increasing importance of equity compensation in competitive hiring, particularly for senior technical roles. And third, the tax implications of stock option timing in states with high income tax rates, which is particularly relevant for Meridian's Austin headquarters given Texas's lack of state income tax and the implications for executives relocating from high-tax states. I paused, letting the technical precision of my answer settle over the room. The weighting on equity compensation is set at 1.4 times the industry standard, because my analysis of Meridian's competitor landscape showed that 8 of your 12 direct competitors have increased equity packages by an average of 23% over the past 18 months. Underweighting that variable would have produced a model that was already obsolete. Victoria Reyes nodded slowly. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked like respect. Thank you, Lisa, she said. That is exactly the level of analytical rigor we were hoping to see. She paused, then added, I appreciate you explaining your methodology. It is clear how well you command the subject, because this was your methodology, not Dominic's, not the team's. Yours. The room was absolutely silent. Every person in that boardroom understood what had just happened. Margaret stepped forward and addressed the room. I believe we should take a 30-minute break while we address some internal matters. Victoria, would your team be comfortable waiting in the lobby? Victoria rose, gathering her notes. Of course. The Meridian executives filed out. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. Dominic had not moved. He stood frozen at the podium, his laptop still displaying the stolen presentation, his face a mask of dawning horror. Margaret turned to face him. Dominic, she said, conference room B. Now. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The authority in those words was absolute. Dominic followed Margaret out of the room without looking at me. He could not. Everyone left in the room sat in stunned silence for what felt like a full minute. Then, slowly, conversations began to restart, murmured questions, shocked whispers. Patricia appeared at my elbow, her expression carefully neutral. "Margaret would like you to join them," she said quietly. "Conference room B down the hall." The conference room was small and windowless. Margaret sat at the head of the table, Dominic across from her, pale. Helen Park from HR was in the corner with a notepad. Margaret opened the folder she had been carrying. Email trails, metadata, version histories, Patricia's log. "Dominic," she said, "I am going to give you one opportunity to explain yourself. Choose your words carefully." Dominic leaned forward, his charm instinct kicking in. "Margaret, I think there has been a miscommunication. Lisa is a talented member of my team, and I have always valued her contributions. When I present the team's work, it is a reflection of my role as their leader. That is what SVPs do. We represent the collective output." Margaret did not blink. "Then explain why Lisa's name appears nowhere in any of the 7 presentations you have delivered in the past 4 months. Explain why the file metadata shows that every document was created on her computer, in her user account, with her authorship credentials. Explain why the email trail shows that she briefed you on material that you later presented word for word as original analysis. And explain why you told that room full of people that what you were presenting represented your strategic thinking when you did not develop a single slide." She slid a printout across the table. "And while you are at it, explain why your former firm received 2 formal complaints about the exact same behavior before your departure." "Yes, Dominic, I know about that too." The color drained from his face. Whatever charm he had been preparing to deploy evaporated. His voice came out higher than usual. "I was just trying to represent the team effectively. I never meant to take sole credit. I always intended to acknowledge Lisa's contribution." "You always intended to," Margaret repeated flatly. "In 4 months and 7 presentations, you never once mentioned her name. You never once credited any member of your team. And less than an hour ago, you stood in front of our most important potential client and called her 3 weeks of original analysis. My passion project." Those were your exact words, and we all witnessed it. Dominic had no response. The silence was absolute. Margaret closed the folder. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building within the hour. And I will make sure this is documented thoroughly because the next firm that calls me for a reference is going to hear the truth." Dominic's composure finally cracked. "Margaret, please, I have 2 kids. I have a mortgage. This will follow me everywhere." "It should follow you everywhere," Margaret said, "because this is not a one-time mistake. This is a pattern. You did it at your previous firm, you did it here, and if I let you walk away quietly, you will do it at the next firm too." She stood, signaling that the conversation was over. "The people who work under you trusted you to represent their contributions fairly. Instead, you erased them. That is not leadership. That is theft. Get your things. Security is waiting." Dominic rose on unsteady legs. He turned toward the door. I almost felt sorry for him, but then he stopped and looked at me. The expression on his face was not remorse or shame, but rather anger and resentment. As if I had wronged him by refusing to let him steal from me quietly, as if the real offense was not the theft itself, but that I had the nerve to expose it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he walked out of the conference room and out of my professional life, forever. When the door closed behind him, Margaret turned to me. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have acted sooner. I received that call about his history 3 months ago, and I chose to wait for direct evidence rather than act on second-hand information. That delay cost you months of frustration, and I am sorry for that." "I understand," I said. "If you had confronted him without proof, he would have denied everything and positioned himself as the victim. This way, there was no room for doubt." Margaret nodded. "You handled yourself with remarkable composure today. The way you answered Victoria's question, the way you maintained your professionalism, it reminded me why I hired you in the first place." She paused, her expression softening. "Speaking of which, Victoria Reyes is waiting in the lobby. I believe we have a presentation to finish. We walked back to the main conference room together. Victoria and her team had returned and were seated in their original positions. I stood at the podium where Dominic had stood an hour earlier. The same slides were displayed on the screen behind me. The same analysis, the same recommendations, the same 3 weeks of work. But this time, the person presenting it was the person who had actually created it. I delivered the rest of the presentation in 45 minutes. I answered every question Victoria and her team asked. And when I finished, Victoria Reyes stood and extended her hand. "Lisa," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "that was exceptional. I have one question though. How long were you planning to let him take credit before you did something about it?" I smiled. "Just long enough to make sure everyone saw the truth for themselves." She nodded. "Smart. We will be in touch." 3 days later, Meridian Tech signed a $12 million annual contract with Whitmore Financial Partners. The account was assigned to me, with a promotion to Senior Vice President of Client Relations. Margaret made the announcement at our weekly all-hands meeting. The applause felt different this time, not just congratulatory. It was full of respect. They had seen what happened. They knew the challenges I had faced and how I had handled them. After the meeting, I stopped Patricia in the hallway. "I never got a chance to thank you properly," I said, "for keeping that log, for paying attention when nobody else did, for having my back when it mattered." Patricia smiled. "Actually, it was not personal. I have watched a lot of careers over the years," she said. "Some people take shortcuts. Some try to steal what they have not earned. I have seen how environments that tolerate this kind of behavior quickly decay from the inside. I simply did not want to be part of that decay, that is all." She paused. "You earned this, Lisa. Every bit of it. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. I think about that day sometimes. About Patricia and her manila folder. About Margaret and her carefully laid trap. About Victoria Reyes and her pointed questions. About the 41 people who watched a man's career end in real time. But mostly, I think about Dominic Hale. About the arrogance that made him believe he could keep taking without consequence. About the moment he realized that every shortcut has a cost and the bill always comes due. I heard through industry contacts that he struggled to find work after Whitmore. The pattern Patricia had documented followed him like a shadow. Some people said I should feel sorry for him, that everyone deserves a second chance. But here is the thing. It was not one mistake. It was a pattern of calculated decisions repeated over months and across multiple companies. He chose to erase my name from my own work. He chose to do this not once, not twice, but systematically, deliberately, every single time. Each of those moments was a chance to stop. Each was a chance to say my name, to share the credit, to be the leader he was hired to be, and each time he chose himself instead. Second chances are for people who acknowledge what they did wrong. Redemption is for people who take responsibility. Dominic Hale did neither. He made excuses. He blamed miscommunication. He called it a management style difference. That is not remorse. That is spin. And those are two very different things. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full pink file playlist's waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.